And welcome back. This segment brought to you by the Topoco Lodge, where adventure and sanctuary meet. If you're looking for a place to relax in a mountain setting by a beautiful river, Topoco.com is the website you need to check out. If you're looking for whitewater rafting, kayaking, mountain biking, Topoco.com is the site you need to check out because the Topoco Lodge offers all of that. They have a huge footprint up there in the mountain right by the beautiful rushing Cheoah River. And you've got your choice. You can either relax in your sanctuary or go take part in the adventure. Topoco.com to learn more about the spectacular Topoco Lodge. All right, guys, what's the early buzz nationally or just in the other recruitniks that you talk to? Is there any kind of early view of Josh Heupel in this staff that they're off to a bad start, or I like the way they do this, or is it just a blank slate at this point because it's too early?
I think a lot of it is a blank slate to a degree. I think early returns are that this staff is going to be pretty involved in the Midwest. They've got some ties up there. Tim Banks in Detroit, Alex Golish in Ohio. They recruited a lot of Midwest tight ends in this class before landing on Brody Foley. So obviously Taven Jackson from Indiana at quarterback. So that's a little bit different. We'll see how much this staff can win the big battles in the Southeast. That's ultimately what's going to determine, I think, how well this staff recruits. This year, we're just not going to get much of a feel for that because they're so far behind on a lot of the top players in states like Georgia and Alabama that it's just going to be tough. This staff does have some ties in Florida that will help, but outside of Tennessee and Florida, I think it's a lot of unknown and somewhat in the Midwest because this staff's made some early impressions, but just haven't had guys on campus, and it makes it tough to assess kind of how they're doing. But in state, I think they've done a pretty good job of building relationships, at least.
Josh?
Yeah, and with the dead period being a factor, which we can dive into, you have a lot of guys coming from UCF, so they were recruiting different level in some cases than at Tennessee. So it can make it a bit slower. So when we talk about some of the guys that Tennessee has missed on at quarterback or another position, I think a lot of the response is not, well, what is Josh Heupel doing? It's, well, look at the situation Josh Heupel is trying to deal with at Tennessee. So I think that comes back to the blank slate of a lot of people, if they're analyzing what's going on with Tennessee recruiting, it's recognizing what the situation is.
The dead period, which has gone on forever, due to COVID, basically, you haven't been able to have visitors on your campus, and that's cut down on coaches face-to-face and everything else. You've been trying to recruit by Zoom, and that's no way to meet somebody. That ends, at the end of next month? At the end
May 31st is the last day of the dead period.
End of this month. Mm-hmm. All right. How much of a hindrance has that been? And we talked about this briefly, so I'll just ask Ryan this so we can get out of this early. You weren't here when we discussed this earlier a few weeks ago. It would seem that the dead period is rough for everybody. But if you're a new coach, and look at the SEC, down toward the bottom of the recruiting rankings are the new coaches. Yep. And I think that one of the reasons is you're not even able to say, hello, my name is. You don't get that opportunity. How much of the woes for Tennessee so far have been driven by that dead period?
I think a huge part of that, honestly, like you said, that you do what you can by Zoom, you FaceTime with players, you do everything you can to sort of break down those barriers, but at the end of the day, the only visitors they've had on campus are players who just went in the stands to go to their open practice last month or the spring game. So it's not the same at all. They haven't met with any players in person yet. And once that changes, I think you'll see Tennessee start to build even more momentum. But every staff that has come to Tennessee has had some first-year success. Think back to Butch Jones getting guys like Jalen Hurd and Todd Kelly Jr. to commit within their first few months on the job. The reason they did that was because they got them on campus, got a lot of in-state players there together, and started selling them on the idea of, hey, this big in-state movement. You can't do that with guys like that when they're not able to visit in person. So I think that's really hurt this staff, and to the point earlier, with this in-state class in particular, not being able to sell that big in-state movement to players on campus.
Anything to add before we hit the break?
I would say one win would be getting Taven Jackson ahead of the start of the reopen. So instead of him going through the process in June and not committing yet, having him committed to Tennessee gives you something to work with when things open up here in a few weeks.
You've got a building block to start with.
For sure.
If you're going brick by brick, for example, you have a brick. All right. When we come back, when it comes to roster churn, has any school faced the amount of attrition that Tennessee has this offseason? The answer will surprise you. Come on back.